everyone. Welcome to this HR Thought Leadership Online Series, Episode 3. I am Nicole Ramji, the founder of HR Synthesis. We specialize in human resources, governance, risk and compliance, BE consulting, and business transformation. Joining me is my colleague, Jenny de Kooker, our principal consultant, who will be moderating this episode. It is amazing to see so many new people from all over the world. Welcome back to our loyal supporters. We are delighted to have you all join us. Following on from our last topic, a human-centric approach to digital transformation, we will be discussing today Agile HR and the new ways of work. Agile HR is described as a philosophy, a culture, and a set of management practices that determine how HR interacts with the workforce. It enables HR to design programs and technology with and for employees, thereby elevating the employee experience. Ultimately, it enables the organizations to become more responsive and adaptable to the ever-changing landscape. The pandemic has definitely fast-tracked the desire to reimagine the workplace and its operations for many organizations. Our brilliant panel will unpack what Agile HR looks like, and they will provide insights and practical examples from their clients across the globe. If you're looking to gain a competitive advantage through new ways of working, our panel will provide simple guidelines to get you started on your Agile HR journey. Our aim is not to get caught up too much in the HR Agile terminology, such as epics and Kanbans and OKRs. We are more concerned about starting the conversation on how to shift the mindset to embrace a new and more agile way of working. So the bad news is that you will not become certified Agile experts at the end of this session. However, the good news is that you will be able to gain insights and understanding from simple examples provided by our panel on why and how you can get started on this Agile journey. Our objectives for the session is to unpack what Agile HR means and why it's important, the misconceptions and challenges of Agile HR, how HR departments can enable agility in the workplace, and provide practical examples of Agile and new ways of working in HR. In terms of our agenda for today, Jenny will take us through housekeeping. We will then get into our interviews with our guest speakers, followed by a Q&A session and a pop-up evaluation poll before we wrap up and close out for today. So let me introduce you to our panel. We are joined by Sarika Kabanda, a global lean change agent and change hacker. Sarika has been instrumental in leading change transformations globally. She helps organizations build an adaptive growth mindset and onboard them on a path to agility that allows them to respond and adapt in the VUCA world today. Sarika is based in India. Unfortunately, our second speaker had suddenly fallen ill today. Unfortunately, Miles couldn't join us. Miles Hopkins is the founder of Be Agile, a business agility specialist who guides organizations to place the customer at the center of everything they do, while simultaneously enabling this through winning market strategies, focused innovation, seamless and timely delivery, digital solutions, and real-time business intelligence. Our third speaker is Anya van Beek. She was unable to join us live today, so we have pre-recorded our discussion with Anya, and those video clips will be played during this webinar. Anya is a seasoned HR specialist, talent strategist, leadership expert, and ICF-accredited executive coach. She is one of the first worldwide to complete the Agile Talent Certification and is authorized instructor for the Agile Talent track. As you can see, we've had to be very agile this morning in order to get this through to you and deliver this conversation. Over to you, Jen.
Thank you, Nicole. It's absolutely a privilege to be on this episode 3 with you today and to have our wonderful panelists with us. Thank you so much for that introduction. And before we go into housekeeping, what we'd like to do is just to acknowledge the audience. It's absolutely amazing to see people have joined us from all over the world, from Jakarta, from the UK, from Istanbul, from Slovenia, from Zambia, from Kenya, Senegal, India, Nigeria, and also just to say thank you to our loyal supporters here in South Africa. We are really privileged to have you all join us today. Lastly, we'd also like to acknowledge our partners, Mariana Carroll Consulting, the Agile, IT Winners, and Onyx. So let's get into the housekeeping items for today. So if you need to make any audio settings, you can just adjust and find that on the left bottom corner of your screen. For chat box and comments, we love to hear from you during the session. So please post your comments, please introduce yourself on the chat. And for Q&A, which will be run a little bit later, we're looking forward to all your questions. So, and I'll definitely be engaging with you further there. So let us set the scene for today's session. Agile HR, as you know, is an exciting topic, but it can be very intimidating at first and hard to contextualize. Most HR teams face the same problems and share the need to modernize, digitalize, and deliver value at speed. As a result, the HR profession is in catch-up mode when it comes to Agile. Not only do we need to understand what Agile means in order to guide wider organization transformation, but also begin to apply the mindset ourselves to revolutionize our own ways of working. So with that said, let's go into our first poll survey. We'd like to get some interaction going. So what you're going to see pop up on your screen right now is the first question. So I'm going to read it out, and I would like to encourage you, please, as you are there, please participate. We'd love to hear from you. So is your HR department modernizing, reimagining their operations through automation and leveraging employee data and focusing on meaningful employee experiences? So you can answer either yes or no or unsure. So while we are waiting for those results, it's going to be really interesting to see what everybody has to say. So let's wait for those results to come in. They're just being calibrated on the back end, and we shall see them soon. It's going to be interesting. Wow, that is fascinating. And I must say, I clearly have a very strong intuition here, because Nicole will know when we were doing our own dry runs, I was predicting 50% of our audience was going to be saying yes. So we're getting to 45% of our audience have said yes, 32% have said no, and 23% are unsure. So I'll be very, very interested, and I'd really like to welcome all the participants. For those of you that have indicated yes, please let us know, what are you doing in terms of modernizing and reimagining your operations, whether it's through automation, whether it's through leveraging employee data, or both, and how you focus on meaningful employee experiences. We would love for you to share that with us in the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to hand back over to Nicole to take us through the discussion with Sarika and our panelists. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Jen. That's quite interesting. Clearly, HR has their work cut out for them. So let me put my first question to Sarika. What is Agile HR, and where does this concept come from?
So first of all, Nicole and Jen, thank you so much for a lovely introduction. Agile, I think I'm going to start with what Agile means to me first, right, before we even dive into Agile HR. And for me, Agile places the customer at the center or the heart of everything. And our work today is totally defined by the value we are delivering to this customer, which is at the center. What does that mean when we say delivering value to this customer? It essentially means we are delivering in small increments, in shorter pieces of time. We are focusing on the priorities that are driven by the customer. We are validating, testing, experimenting with a learning approach, inspecting, adapting, retrospecting at every small interval of time, and doing all this together with the people on this journey with us on a transformation, on change, whatever that journey means. Now, if that's what Agile is, when we look that up together with what does Agile HR look like, it means all of that to me from two perspectives. One, from a very internal HR perspective for the HR department themselves, and we call that Agile for HR. So how does HR really look inwards on their own behavior? How do we apply this whole Agile shift in thinking or ways of working to ourselves? If we are working in our department, can we apply that Agile mindset to ourselves? And then secondly, what does that mean for the rest of the organization? Because I, as HR, want to drive the same enabling environment and the behaviors with that Agile mindset and way of working for my business, for my operations, for IT, for everybody else. So that's a twofold perspective for me. One is Agile for HR, inward looking for HR, and then this whole external piece for the rest of the organization from the HR perspective.
Thank you, Sarika. I couldn't agree with you more. And I do think, change starts within, and we've got to actually adopt that agile and growth mindset for ourselves before we can, take it out to the rest of the organization. What would you say then are the common misconceptions about what agile HR means?
I think there's a laundry list, right, that we can always come up with for misconceptions, and especially in terms of Agile HR. But I'd like us today to focus just on one thing, and I'm sure we'll all agree, especially because we say, yeah, Agile is an IT thing, right? It has nothing to do with HR. And if that's the first thing I'm going to hear, then I'm like, okay, I have today customers who come and say, oh, I love the fact that the Agile Manifesto talks about customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And for me, my customers are my employees, my business, my operations. If that is so easily translated into, something that means to HR, which is really valuable, which is employees, then of course, Agile has everything to do with HR, right? But that's, I think, my topmost misconception that I would like to say, that it has nothing to do with HR. And then I can go on. I think we were discussing earlier this weekend, we can just come up with a laundry list, but let's just say Agile's not for HR is my top item there.
And you are so correct. I think that, what we find in our organization as well, and, taking it out to our clients, is that, the topic of being agile and the work that we're doing in the digital transformation space, our entry point is actually through IT departments as opposed to the HR departments, because Agile seems to be happening more and more, driven from the technical teams and from the IT teams. And we're knocking on the doors of, HR departments, and we're still trying to, put this practice forward and help HR play catch up to where the rest of the business is going. And I think in our discussions earlier this week, that Miles was a part of, he was basically saying it's time for HR people to step up and to take that seat at the table, right?
Or even set the table.
And set the table, that's right. He even said set the table. And I think that's so critical. And I mean, there's various reasons why HR hasn't had the opportunity in many organizations to get to the table and have that seat. But I think, especially with the onset of the pandemic, it has really highlighted, and brought HR to the forefront. So this is our opportunity to get close to the business, to understand what is happening, to understand our business, to understand the industry in which we operate in, the market, and then really co-create and collaborate with business leaders, with employees, to find the solutions that will deliver good value to our customers. Because if we don't adapt and become agile as a business, and we don't enable that through our people, we're going to be left behind.
Very true.
Okay, so this is a question I'd actually asked Anya in our session last week. Why is Agile HR and finding new ways of working so important? And this is what she had to say.
Nicole, I think it's such an important question to consider. It's not sufficient anymore to focus on the traditional way of doing HR. The world is evolving. The future of work is looking totally different. And it is critical for HR teams to actually catch up and almost be the front runner in being adaptive and introducing new ways of work. I mean, Nicole, I think you know yourself that when you think of the HR team, it's really the focus or that center of all the HR people-related practices and strategies and focus areas. I mean, it really boils down from the organizational structure to who and how you appoint people, looking at things like leadership development, how do we reward and recognize people? So it's critical for HR to be agile and to actually have a new approach. So I think it's so important that we need to understand that the future demands a different approach. And yeah, this is an opportunity for us to really make a difference and add value to our organizations.
So Sarika, what would you like to add on to Anya's comments there?
I definitely feel the world is, I mean, we are living in a VUCA world. The pandemic has definitely changed everything, right? With or without the pandemic, I would say the past many years have been a state of VUCA. I think the pandemic just surfaced up everything, right? And just told us and showed it us in the face that this is it. Now you've got to change now or you're going to get obsolete. And that's what Miles and I also spoke about earlier this week. We were like, you need to stay relevant or else, you're just going to be out of the market you're just going to get obsolete, right? So yes, the whole agile thinking has started from IT, but it has percolated and cascaded to the fact that if an organization today has got to stay relevant, you've got to together respond as an organization. It is all about agility end-to-end in the organization and not just about IT responding to a piece of change in the market. The whole organization has got to inspect, adapt, and respond to what's happening outside in the market. And that's what's going to allow organizations in today's world, I would say, to not just survive, but also thrive. And for that, I think HR is a key backbone to make the difference as a supporting enabling function and drive that from the front rather than what it's been doing in the past where, you've been having HR drive this or being driven by IT, which initiates the agile transformation and those pieces in the organization. So I would say HR now probably has got to take the front seat, as we just shared a while ago, and probably drive it with them in the front, enable themselves, build the environment for themselves to be more agile, and then enable that very same environment for the rest of the organization to build that agility in them.
I agree. I mean, even Miles had said earlier that the people component is the most critical part of being agile, and helping them drive that forward and drive the strategic work of the business. So, it's no longer that HR can perform their traditional processes and functions and stick with the tactical side of their operations. It's really now to spearhead the transformation. So what are some? Yeah, sorry, go for it.
If I may, I mean, I was just saying, and there is no reason why we would not want to, adapt for the future, because the future is just got too many different things, coming up for HR, and I think it's an interesting challenge to have, for HR to be driving this from the front. And as you know, I've been working and coaching a number of organizations and departments now where, HR is starting to do that. And I think they see the difference. They see the need of why they should drive it. So I would be surprised if they do not want to do it. It's in their interest to do that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, yes, we finding it a very exciting time to be in, and a very exciting space. But there are some challenges that organizations are facing. So what are those challenges in terms of trying to adapt to the new ways of working and becoming more agile? And are there any recommendations you can put forward in terms of how do you get around those challenges?
Sure. Um, let's let me highlight two main challenges that I see from an agile HR point of view, right? And yeah, I don't think I'm going to give you silver bullets for recommendations, but yeah, a couple ideas that people could try out, right? So I think it goes back to my earlier point where, agile is for IT. I think that is also a challenge because that gets ingrained in the mindset of people, and HR struggles with that. Whenever I have to reach out to HR today, that's the first thing. Agile's not for me. So why would you come to me? Why do I need to be agile? What's in it for me is the question. And that's where you try and help them understand what's in it for you as HR. What does it mean to have this agile mindset? What changes for you? What are the insecurities that we can and cannot address for you? Because yes, it does lead to a lot of insecurities in people. People are people. It's not just about HR, right? If you put a change to me or you, we will also be like, whoa, what is that, right? So, and why are you throwing that change out to me? It is a change. And I think this is best done with what we spoke earlier, co-creating, because you need to do this together so that you get less resistance and you push resistance out of the way in a big way, understanding with each other what this whole agile thing really means to you. And in this case, what agile means to HR. A second challenge, I would say, and I'll come back to this first one, I'd like to add a couple points, but it's linked to the second one because one key challenge that people face in the HR side is visualization. Now, when we do agile transformations in the IT world, we talk about, let's just put things out in the open. And we're not saying like share it with the whole organization, at least just put it out for yourself and your team to visualize. Now, visualization, as we would know, even without the word agile, is a simple, super effective tool. It's something that enables trust building. It's something that unites people to create like a common platform for collaboration. I look at it as a tool that enables conversations. It's a conversation provoker, builds alignment. You get something to the wall or a screen, have all your stakeholders there together. It starts to surface roadblocks. It starts to show you things where you might be stuck, what you could make a change to, and how can you engage in conversations and bring alignment. And that gets me back to the previous point where having visualized all this, and this you can do using like a number of tools, right? You've got Scrum, you've got Kanban, but I don't want to talk about the tools, but it's the whole mindset shift that I don't want to refrigerate my process, but radiate the process. So put it out somewhere. And that itself is a shift to tell you where you're stuck. Even if you're able to eliminate a few processes, a few products while you're building them, and if that's not relevant for your customer, have the customer involved in a conversation with you. And if that's not going to be relevant to your customer, why create that product as HR for your customer? Now, that product could be a recruitment product, an L&D product. It doesn't matter what that is. And that gets me to the point of building this whole agile culture. And that has to be driven by HR. First for themselves, so it kind of starts unlocking their mind traps today. And that opens this up for the rest of the organization, because they can enable the rest of the organization only if they can enable that for themselves. And it's all about the environment. You don't have to change people. People don't need to be changed. Give them the environment and people will figure out how to behave.
I love it. I love the concept of visualization and bringing people into the conversation. I think it helps break down the silos that often happen that you see in organizations, and really putting the customer at the center of the discussion, right? And whether it's your internal customer or your external customer, it's getting people involved and being able to provide a platform, whether it's a solution, a product, a service, your employee life cycle that talks to those customers. And I think that is really, really something simple and easy to use. And it comes on to another point that Miles had mentioned earlier around empathy and journey mapping, right? Where
Yes.
it's really walking in the shoes of somebody else and creating these personas and trying to understand what it is that they would want and what they experience wherever they are that sit in, the organization, for example. But there was one thing that you said around, HR, and I know you do coaching at your clients, and I wanted to ask, in your clients where you're coaching HR professionals, have they ever encountered a situation where they've battled, say they're on board with Agile HR practices and they really want to drive agility in the organizations, but have they encountered like roadblocks with maybe C-suite executives that are not necessarily on board? And give us some examples of that and how you've managed to coach them around it.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the bottleneck lies. It starts there. And it's no surprise, not for anybody. And I also say it's natural, right? Because when we as coaches are also invited to do an enterprise transformations, we are like, our teams have got to change, our organizations have got to change, but it's not us at the top. We just don't have to change. And that's not really true at all. So yes, I have been encountering a lot of that in almost all my transformations to start with. No matter if the transformation for me has started from HR or the IT departments, you will hit the C-suite resistance button everywhere. My sincere approach to do that is to co-create. And that's a magic pill that works. But yes, you do get a question, oh, I cannot co-create with the rest of the 20,000 people. Nah, we're not saying that, because your change has got to start small and then it has to explode out, right? And you want to figure out what that radius of change is going to be. So you've got to co-create with the people impacted by the change so that they become your allies, or as I say, they are your early adopters, right? So that's one silver bullet approach that I generally would use. Another thing I would definitely want people to understand is that we're all people. Now, let's not forget that we as people go to an organization. We do not change as human beings. So our thinking of what social change is applies exactly the same to organizational change, which means if I'm resisting a change in my personal life, I might even resist the change in a professional life. But we forget, we say, oh, that team is resisting to this change and those leaders are resistant. Guess what? Sometimes you have to give people the option to opt out. And I do give the option to, and I'll talk of a specific example in this case, and that'll probably give you more insights. One of the HR departments in one of my transformations, and the head of HR kind of said, nah, we don't need to change because Agile doesn't mean anything to us. And I was like, no problem, we'll come back to you, take your time, understand it. Of course, in the organization, we were doing already what's in it for me kind of workshops, right? I ensured that these people in HR and the ones that I could influence are always invited to those kind of workshops, just to be observers in the back, come and see what's happening and figure things out. It took us 8 months. And then the head of HR comes and says, you know what? it kind of makes sense. We probably can take some best practices, and we're okay with the word best practice to start with, though that doesn't apply in today's complex world. Best practice means nothing, it's emerging practices. But I think it's a great start. You've got your foot in the door, you've got a person saying yes to change, you're already cutting off a lot of resistance. Because if I had to just keep pushing that change to those people, you're just going to hit a brick wall and you're not going to move forward. So I don't know. I can go on. I'm so passionate about this. And you can imagine I can just go on and on, but I know we are constrained on time too. And I want to respect that. So tell me, Nicole, can I add something more?
Yeah, go for it. Please do.
Okay. There's another example I would take for an organization. In fact, this is not one that I was coaching. I was just having a conversation on my talk show, and that's called Perspectives of Change. And I'll be happy to share that link for the conversation. This is a conversation from the head of HR in a bank and the head of business and operations. And they decided to do this whole journey of coming together and co-creating change together. But before that, yes, they were wondering, the head of HR, in fact, himself said that even during the conversation. He was like, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to this workshop. I'm not sure what value this is going to have. And he goes to the workshop, and it's a scaled agile workshop. It's a 2-day workshop. It's a really techie workshop. And he was like, at the end of the workshop, the only thing he realized after that is like, okay, the Agile manifesto resonates with him now. And he feels that the rest of the organization is the customer. They want to create products together. The business should be considered a friend. The rest of the organization is a friend. So let's sit down, let's have a talk. And I think they've been now on this amazing journey for 2 years, co-creating everything with their, the rest of the organization. Believe it or not, they're doing OKRs together. They're doing roles together. They're kind of doing away with designations because they don't see how that makes sense in having a designation. So if you as an employee is hired, you're like, I have a designation and that has this JD, but when I go and work for the business, it's a role. And what the hell does that mean? It's different. They are kind of eliminating that too. So they're working on a lot of things together between business and HR. Some of these HR people now also sitting with the business. Like we said, go see how the business works, see what value you can add because they are your customer. How do you co-create the rest of that journey to them? And they all had nice things to say about each other to each other, which is amazing.
I mean, that's really, what we're seeing as well. It comes down to, where each person is at, where each client is at, in the change readiness space. And you've actually got to meet your client where they're at. So you can't force it upon them. And I think it is a bit of a journey that you've got to have to take. As you mentioned, the client that took 8 months to get on board and want to adopt, moving towards an agile way of working. And it is something that takes time, and it also talks to the maturity, agile maturity of the organization. And I think it's important to have these discussions, and that's why today has been so important, and we wanted to spearhead it with these discussions because we felt it's so relevant, it's so topical at the moment. And as we've said in the beginning, it's really not to chunk down a whole lot of technical terminologies and make academic presentation about agile HR. It is to break it down into micro steps that people just start, as you said, change and shift the thinking, adopt an open growth mindset, and just start looking within and then within your organization to look at different ways that you can speed up and improve processes and systems, and create a meaningful workspace that really drives true value for the employees who work under incredible pressure these days. That's just the nature of the world that we live in. And we have such challenging demands. So I think it becomes so important to help people through their journey and to educate and create awareness and allow people, provide the context and the information, but allow people to find their space and to own it. Because once, you get your key stakeholders, your HR people, your C-suite to own, the process and own the concept, I think then it becomes so much easier to roll out, because as you said, it's finding those change agents, in the organization. You've got to, zone in on those people and take them on the journey, because they are the soldiers that will actually take the message out and help get the organization, to adopt. And I think this is why, creating and building those personas of the different people and personas in your organization, you're able to adopt your change management processes, to adopt your HR strategy and operating model, taking into consideration the different business units, the different people, what are they experiencing, what are their roadblocks, what are their challenges, then to go and enhance your HR operations that way.
True. I love the fact that you said micro steps. Given your question, right, of how can an organization overcome this? I call those tiny actions, right? It's I think something that BJ Fogg came up with. It's got a book on tiny actions. And I think it's a fabulous thing that you can implement. And I implement that even in my personal life. You can't, as a human being, really do macro changes. It's practically impossible. Try and implement it on yourself and it doesn't work. So why implement it in an organization on others when it doesn't work for yourself? And tiny actions works. And just take that small thing. I mean, I still remember talking to one of the leaders and they were like, oh, the culture needs to be collaborative, So we were talking with HR and how do you build the collaborative structure? And then, the biggest question comes in. Oh, it's an IT team, but people have got to have individual performance KPIs. And I was like, and how is that going to be collaborative? Because having individual KPIs is going to make them fight against each other. And they were like, okay, that makes sense. So what are you proposing? I was like, I'm not proposing. You could do a small experiment and learn from it if that works. And you don't have to do it for the whole organization, right? So the tiny action is for this team, just make an exception that we're going to have like a team KPI and a team thing. That's the only thing you're going to do. You're not going to say, oh, the developer is going to fight against the tester and find as many defects, tester, come on. And that's not how it works, right? Because then you are going against the point of collaboration and you want to set that culture. So I think it's also about HR, working with HR, where HR was then stepping in to say, hey, if we want to build this kind of a culture, let's try and increase the supporting structures and eliminate those, what do you call them, limiting structures, because the more such structures you keep adding in the organization, the more you're going to go away from that. But that has got to come from the top. Again, that's where the leader sets the stage to set things in the environment, right? Just going back on that point. So yes, tiny actions in your space to do that.
Love it. I absolutely love it. So Miles was talking earlier this week about how HR can enable agility in the workplace. And some of the things he was saying is that, or one key point was that there's no single solution. So I think, we've been built as HR people to do things from a very consistent approach. And Anya even talks to it later on around trying to do a one size fits all. And that doesn't really work. So even when it comes to your org design, your performance management, your reward and recognition, there actually has to be different, processes and different, strategies across, across the business. But I want to get more into, some of the practical examples. So, but before I do that, let's pull up our next survey. And so here we're looking at, if you see on your screen now, the survey has come up. It's a quick poll that says, is your HR department preparing employees for the VUCA world or the fourth industrial revolution? So your options are yes, no, or unsure. So I'll give you a few seconds to select, make your choice, and then we'll pull up the results. Okay, so the results have just come in, and while I look at that, we have 47% that says no, 11% that says unsure, and only 42% that says yes, they are being prepared for the VUCA world. So I think there's still a lot of work that has to be done. We've got a long way to go. This is something that Jenny and I are extremely passionate about in terms of preparing employees for the future. We have no idea what that looks like and what the future job roles will be, but there's definitely an emphasis on adapting and growing and taking on a growth mindset. So it's what we call adaptability, being agile and responsive enough to be able to embrace any kind of change that's coming your way. And, you know, looking and listening to what Sarika has said, we believe that adopting a growth mindset that allows you to visualize new and better ways of working, not only for ourselves, but for our teams and for our organization, is going to go a long way to keeping ourselves relevant in the future and keeping our organizations relevant in the future. Okay, so the next question is what I put to Anya, where she provides examples around new developments in the recruitment aspect of HR, and this was her response.
But in my view, the recruitment side, if you have a look at the onboarding and the recruitment, that's a very easy way where we can co-create with the leaders and the managers in the organization. So that's a place where a lot of the people choose to start. And if you have consider what Sarika just mentioned earlier on, and you have a look at Agile HR, it's not only how we as an HR team operate, it's also how we change the policies and procedures in order to help the business create flow to our customers. There's a lot of red tape, or there used to be a lot of red tape with the traditional way of recruitment. There's an opening and somebody needs to approve it, and then the remuneration committee might still need to sign it off. And that will just not work in this fast-paced world. And that's why adopting a more agile approach is a lot easier. So one of the clients in the software industry, we have worked on their recruitment processes. And what they've tried to do is to simplify the way that they recruit people. So they have made two small changes. Firstly, they have stopped to only focus on external recruitment agencies, and they brought their recruitment in-house. And secondly, they involve people over and above the HR team with the recruitment process. Another client, what was very important for them was to make sure that the employee value proposition, so if you have a look at that branding, why they want to join your company, was aligned. And I know that a lot of people will think, oh, but we do have that employee brand in place. But I think it's critical for us to consider the employee experience when they're busy with the recruitment process and they start on their first day. Is there alignment there? It might be that you wowed them during the recruitment process and that you were agile and it was something different. And then when you got to day one, what was the onboarding process, especially now that we move towards a virtual way of working. I actually smiled because one of my clients in the banking industry, they were very, they got a lot of resistance from the business when they wanted to do the onboarding process virtually. And they've actually invested a lot of time and money into get all the new employees on one venue, and they do an onboarding process there. And that worked for them. And it was last year with COVID, they were forced almost overnight to adopt a different approach. So whenever I think of recruitment, it's not only the recruitment process, but also I want to say that first 100 days of the employee's life cycle and what they then experience, and how fluid and adaptive they feel the company is looking at their needs and their goal setting, and learning, getting to know the team, especially in this virtual way world.
So Sarika, can you provide any examples from your global clients in terms of recruitment practices?
For sure, Nicole. I think one of the examples that I get reminded of, and when you mentioned just before we came to what Anya was saying, you mentioned what Miles had said, right? There's no single recipe. And that's one thing I say to everybody anyways, right? There's no one size fits all. And your flavor of Agile HR is your flavor of Agile HR. Now, what this organization does will definitely be different from what you're doing. But there will be guidelines that we will have, which will guide you through that whole process. Now, how you make your recipe is really up to you. So you make your pizza, you have the ingredients, just make sure you have the right ingredients. And that's how I would look at it. And it makes life easy when you have to shift your mindset, right? That's how I can coach a team to shift that mindset then. Think about this whole recruitment piece. I love the example, in fact, what Anya just mentioned in her collaboration. That was really nice. I can definitely see some resonance there. One of the challenges I think I would face from most of my clients in the recruitment side is where people think just HR is needed to do it all. And the moment you put on the Agile HR hat, you're like, okay, cross-functional teams. We need sales involved, marketing involved, and development, business, the whole value chain involved. And I think for that, the organization has got to understand what end-to-end agility really means. And that's where we stress on business agility. That makes life, let's say it's a chicken and egg thing, right? It makes it simple and difficult to drive transformations at the same time. But that's because today organizations are not static machines. They have moving parts, and we have to understand that. And having understood that, a change in one part of the organization is going to impact, I don't know, 10, 50 different other parts of the organization is quintessential. It goes without saying. And just HR cannot make a decision, because you are doing that for a certain customer and you're going to make that happen. So even if I was driving a transformation in a lot of my examples from the IT side or from a business side, or even from directly the HR entry point of view, because it depends where in the organization you start transformation for Agile, right? And irrespective of that, I think the first place that you generally will boil down to either ways will be HR, because even if it is driven from IT, you will stop at HR because, okay, you need people, right? Now, I need people with skills. Do I have them? Okay, we don't have them. Who's going to get them? Oh, HR department. They pretty much do only recruitment. That's first of all another myth, but that's wrong. But yeah, you start with that, and that's where you then come to HR, right? And I think it's important for people to understand how to do this together. So my approach, like I said, is always about co-creation. So given a problem statement that you have at hand, bring the right people in the value chain together, which means in terms of recruitment too, if sales and marketing have initiated it, you've got a contract, you've got to involve HR, you've got to involve business, you've got to involve IT, and maybe even external stakeholders or vendors who are there. Get them together and kick off the whole product, project, whatever you call it, in the right way with all the stakeholders involved. So first of all, they're going to own up to that whole thing together, which means HR is going to also hold their end of the game, right? Now, in terms specifically about recruitment, I think a lot of challenges that come in terms of the HR approach to doing things is they have to look for a culture which fits the needs of this department, because it's really not one culture for the whole organization. I've worked for so many banks. Every department has a different culture. A collaborative culture is very different from a control culture, is very different from a startup culture. And you've got to understand the different types of cultures. So even there, I think HR plays a key role where they help define one size does not fit all. And that's again a mindset shift, even for HR, to move that, oh, these are not the fixed parameters. We're going to have to look at different aspects because the request is coming from a product department. The request is coming from, a startup department. Now, I work with banks who call themselves like, okay, we are a 22,000 people startup. Now, how do you deal with that? That's a different mindset altogether. So HR's got to think differently. Anya mentioned a very key point where recruitment, having not outsourcing everything, but having that internal accountability. I've worked a lot with HR also to bring that internally. Again, first of all, having those cross-functional teams itself is a big challenge. But if you follow the right steps, bring everything to a visualized state, get the stakeholders together, have the right conversations, figure out where the roadblocks are, prioritize it with your customers and partners in this whole product statement of, statement at hand, figure out what needs to be done, why should we do it in isolation, why is it beneficial then for us to do this together, what skills are we looking for. And in one of my examples also, I think we partnered with L&D. In fact, we got the recruitment team to work together with L&D to figure out, okay, this department is looking for these skills. They don't have it, but we're not looking at these as gaps. We are looking at those a slightly different mindset. The growth mindset comes in where you're saying they're not deficiencies in people, but these are skills that you need to, implant into that part of the department. So that's, again, a mindset shift, a very agile thing to do. Not look at it from a negative point of view, but a very positive point of view, and you want to bring those people into. So yeah, we had a lot of benefits there because L&D actually was our advocate to the recruitment department saying, hey, Agile is a great thing. We did this, we did that. And I was like, that's half the work done for me. I don't have to sell Agile. I mean, even in co-creation, you're not selling, but you have to have the right balance between selling and co-creation, right? Because yes, organizations are traditional. You have to work with the traditional mindsets to get forward. So it's really good to have your early adopters who then enable you to move forward and become advocates for you.
Thank you, Sarika. So now I'd like to listen to Anya, what Anya had to say in terms of the trends that she's seen locally with her clients in terms of learning and development.
So we definitely see spaced learning, shorter periods of time. And I mean, that's beneficial in both, in more than one way. So not only is the people not away from their desk for so long, but I think it's a lot easier for them to process the information. An important point when we look at L&D and a more agile way of doing that is not to have a stock standard workshop, but almost again have a look at that individual employee need. Because say, for instance, Nicole, me and you are in one team. It might be that your needs are slightly different to mine. And are you as an HR team ready to provide and give us what we need? And one of the big lessons that I myself had to learn as well is to have a look at not only co-creating and involving, including the people in the design of the learning and development program, but also to know when is good enough. Because if we want to wait until something is perfect, we're really wasting time. So again, it's that adopting that agile principle of we have something, we design something that's good to go, and then based on the feedback, we tweak and we enhance. So that's the second thing that I can perhaps mention. And I think thirdly, it's really to think of how do you utilize technology in making the learning experience positive? Because especially now where everything is virtual, we're talking about Zoom fatigue. And even more so when you have virtual training. So what games or other platforms can you introduce to make the learning experience a good one for the employees? Yeah, I definitely believe that there's a bigger shift towards the informal learning, almost learning on the job. I mean, if you think of the research, the learning happens actually there where they experiment, where they make mistakes. Sometimes they even pair people together and they're working in pairs. And that's a way where learning happens as well. So I don't want to say that a graduate program, there's no place for it, because I do believe it cultivates a way of thinking. Having said that, I sometimes question if the thinking that they cultivate is the right one. Because if you have a look at different programs, do they actually teach us skills to be adaptive? Do they teach us skills to be mindful? Looking at the softer side,
Yes.
I almost want to call it soft skills that's required to operate effectively.
No
So
problem.
Sarika, what examples do you have in terms of L&D?
Couple of them actually. But before we get into an example, I think it's important as the context for this example itself, right? That HR also needs to feel safe. You know, specifically in the example that I'm taking, L&D needed to feel safe before we could enable that whole journey with them of how they could get more agile from where they are to where they wanted to be. And I think it's important for people to have that factor of psychological safety, just as HR would do for the rest of the organization, right? Because people need to feel safe if they have to bring about change. They don't want to be held for, you know, you didn't do this, so your performance is going to get, you know, really bad and whatever else. So HR needed to feel safe too. And talking about this specific L&D team, we had to build a very high factor of psychological safety for them and had to understand their intrinsic motivations. And it's really important because the learning zone is where you have high psychological safety and high motivation. And that is not extrinsic motivation totally. We talk of the intrinsic drivers, right? And it's different for everybody. And it changes based on the stage and phase of life where you are today. Could be very different. And that itself, I would say, was a challenge for us to do because of the state the whole organization was in and the way the transformation was being driven and other things. But let's dive in again now into this whole L&D thing. Now, given that we were able to co-create this whole safe, make them feel space, make them feel safe. And once you make people feel safe in this department, they felt, oh, okay, now we are ready to make changes with you. So what do you want us to do for, you know, how do we make this whole L&D piece a little more agile? We were like, you know what, let's start to put the whole L&D process that you have today out on the wall, right? I always start with visualization, just so that people start to feel, and now they started to feel safe. So they were ready to put everything out as is, because earlier they were not willing to talk to us. And they were like, who are you? Why should we talk to you? And, you know, everything else that comes with it where you get pushed back. But visualize that process with the people. L&D was then able to point and say, oh, you know what? That's a redundant thing. We don't need that for the rest of the organization too. So they were able to eliminate parts in their own process and say, okay, we don't need that. Having said that that was not needed, they said, okay, we are building this kind of a learning and development product out for this part of the business. Now, that would mean we would want to roll it out to the whole organization. I was like, well, do you want to roll it out to the whole organization, or can we reduce the radius of change, limit it for now to this department? And they were like, oh, if we can do that, that's great, because otherwise we're going to get, you know, negative feedback anyways from everywhere and push back, and they'll be like, everything is going wrong. And then they also had the challenge that the product needed to be in the tool that was run for the whole organization. We said, let's make an exception. Let's just do it for this department, right? So you've got to enable that environment for them so that they could also get up and say, oh, we're willing to experiment. And that itself is the growth mindset, you know, getting them to be more willing to experiment, try something new out. And they were like, we've never done this. Do you think we'll get permission? I was like, don't worry about that. I'm here with all the permissions. If anything, I'll take it over, right? But they were like, okay, this is cool. Let's try it out. And what we did then with this whole L&D department is, you know, we've all in L&D got this whole learning journeys for the rest of the organization. Either you have the Dreyfus model of acquisition being followed. We had this whole unconscious incompetence to unconscious competence being looked at for every piece in the organization, the learning journeys. And we looked at that. Where do these products fit in? How can they bring more agility? Because the previous products were now going to get invalid, and they were like, oh my God, we've been sending people to those trainings. So what can we do? I said, ask the people. They went out in the departments asking people for feedback, got feedback, got learnings out of that, changed their experiments, and then updated it. I think that's the whole mindset you need, especially that's at least my experience with L&D. I like the fact that they were able to then change focus on from deficiencies in learning journeys of people and bring more focus to acquisition of new skills and development. And I think that was a big difference, because you know how it is when you have performance management, you have L&D sitting together and you're like, okay, so Sarika, you are the person on this team. So now can you tell us? And we were getting people to self-declare, okay? And that doesn't happen normally in organizations. If I'm not safe, I'm not going to declare it. So I'm not going to declare something like, I don't know this programming language, or I don't know project management, or I don't know this aspect of change management. But guess what? People were saying that out loud now and saying, I don't know this, but I'm willing to go to a course and learn this. The fact that L&D shifted their mindset saying that's not a deficiency in Sarika, but that's where she can upskill herself, was a big shift too. So I would say a lot of these aspects that worked for the L&D journeys, with them starting with what's in it for me to with them saying, okay, we are ready to experiment and be on our own journey.
Thank you so much for your wonderful insights, and would like to thank Anya for her contribution through the video clips that we've played, as well as Miles for the points he's put forward earlier this week that we're able to incorporate into our discussion. It's been such a great conversation. We're actually running out of time. So if you do have any questions and you haven't had an opportunity to answer them, please put it in the chat box, and Jenny and I will get back to you offline and provide some responses to you. Very quickly, we've got another poll where you can select 3 areas where your HR department needs revolutionizing. So you can choose from employee wellness, recruitment, learning and development, performance management, flexible working policies, succession planning, compensation benefits, culture, and HR administration. If you can quickly do that for us now, so we can just get a view on what that looks like. All right, so I think that it's impressive to see that there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done from a succession planning point of view. I think, even before the pandemic, and it's generally been a big gap. Culture is very significant in terms of where, leaders have to up their game, as well as employee wellness. So we'll pick that up in our social media campaign and give you a response to that. Jenny, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole. So what we're going to do now is, I think we're running out of time. So I'm just watching the chat, and just want to do a shout out to Robin. She's been very active on the chat today. Robin, thank you so much. She's just said to Jenny and team, really great insights from all the panelists. Thank you very, very much. I think that's some of the inputs that we have received on the chat today. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone that has participated in our pulse surveys. We are going to just be wrapping up with the closing survey evaluation. So if we can please ask for our attendees to just, on a scale of 1 to 5, please rate the content of today's discussion. You will see that pop up on the screen on question 1, and you can select extremely valuable, highly valuable, valuable, or slightly valuable, or not valuable. We're really hoping that it's been a valuable conversation that has been had, and we're very grateful to Sarika for her great insight shared. And then please rate also the overall experience of this webinar with us today on question 2. So if we can just give you some time, please, would love to have your insights there. and just submit that through, please. Thank you very much. So I think sorry, Nicole?
Yeah, so while you're busy doing that, let's just take a recap on what was put forward today in our discussion. So once again, a big thank you to all that's contributed in the chat group, but especially to Sarika, who's held down the fort this afternoon, Anya, and we wish Miles all the best. But clearly from our discussion today, HR has a long way to go, and the polls are definitely showing that. And we need to obviously be engaging in this kind of discussion to help move organizations forward and help organizations and employees adapt for the future. So HR is definitely having a critical role in preparing and enabling change readiness in organizations. HR needs to take up this role by reimagining the strategy as well as their operating model. They need to understand what's happening in the business as well as outside the business in order to be able to prepare the employees for what the future holds, and to help them up their skills and capabilities, and that will help solve future problems. You know, many organizations are not rewarding and recognizing employees for the ability to bring in their entrepreneurial skills, for the ability to learn and grow. People value who they work with, who they work for, what work they do, the places from which they get to work, the technology used, as well as their own personal well-being. They need to enjoy working for companies that are progressive and are cutting edge. So we need to ensure as HR that we are recognizing that, and that we are working with employees and rewarding employees for this learning and this growth. So as Sarika had mentioned before, it's by creating that culture for agility and growth. So HR really needs to consider all of this to begin co-creating better solutions and processes and systems with business leaders as well as with employees in this VUCA world. And whilst doing this, developing and retaining top talent. So some of the, the key points that came out of today's discussion is that no one size fits all approach is going to work. So you really have to understand the organization and adapt to what is actually needed. It's time for HR to take their seat at the table and drive agility, and start by thinking differently and visualizing what the future looks like and what new possibilities look like. And this is enabled through empathy mapping, creating personas, and really putting yourself in the shoes of other employees in the organization, in the shoes of your customers, and understanding what their needs and wants are. Taking a customer-centered and a people-centered approach is going to be critical. Fostering a growth mindset is something that came up time and time again. Co-creating that employee experience to drive high performance, to optimize business results, and ultimately remain competitive. A lot of focus was key insights came through around learning and development, and how that's changed. So, the traditional formal education is still important, but it's a very small component of the kind of learning and development that needs to happen. We're talking about learning and development in short sprints, more social and informal learning that allows employees to be able to apply their knowledge on the job, and to be able to take on stretch assignments, as Sarika said, work across functions and not be restricted by a job description and a designation, but really being able to work anywhere in the organization because they have the capabilities around design thinking, creativity, collaboration, networking, building relationships, and all of these help people come together and find creative solutions that will solve the problems of the future. We didn't really get too much time to go into performance management, but performance management is probably one area that is really going to flip on its head in terms of agile ways of doing performance management. It's tricky at the best of times, but I think that if you look at where we're going with agile practices, it's less about individual KPIs and targets and goals, or OKRs as we call it, and it's more about team focus, team goals, team OKRs, and therefore, it is important to be able to get people to collaborate and work together. Because if you, as Sarika said, if you set individual goals, you're not going to get and drive team collaboration. So that shift is probably one of the biggest shifts that's going to happen in the world of work. But it is happening. There are organizations that are doing it this way, and it is fostering teams to make decisions for themselves on what reward and recognition looks like. So it's no longer incentivizing someone on individual KPIs and individual bonuses. A pool amount is put out to the team, and they decide what they're going to do with it and how they're going to use it. So I think it's really great to start the conversation. A lot of work needs to be done. And I think that, we've engaged amazing people on this platform to be able to bring to light what this means. And it's the tiny actions, or as we say, the micro steps or baby steps that are really going to get us, going in the right direction. It's not about the end goal. It's more about the journey, because in that journey, we will be able to be responsive and adaptive to all the change that is to come, that we won't even know what that looks like. Today we're dealing with a pandemic. Tomorrow it's going to be something completely different. So if your organization needs assistance with business strategy, design, enterprise change management, or you're looking to be certified as an Agile HR specialist, or require any HR and business transformation assistance, please feel free to contact us. Lastly, a big thank you to you, the attendees, for joining and participating in today's session. I truly hope that you found it valuable. And please look out for our episode 4 coming in June 2021. We're following on from our theme of a human-centric approach to digital transformation. We will zoom in on the role that leadership and culture plays in digital transformation. Thank you and goodbye.